Workplace accidents are often the most disturbing because they happen in places that are supposed to feel routine. A normal shift, a familiar machine, or one small mistake can turn into something impossible to stop. In this video, a paper mill worker is pulled into a machine by the material around him. A woman in China is crushed while trying to stabilize a tipping forklift. And a road worker only days from retirement is killed by a machine part that failed without warning. These are some of the most disturbing workplace accidents ever caught on camera. Let's dive straight into the first clip. This accident happened inside the security paper mill in Narmadapuram, India, during what should have been a normal morning shift. On June 22, 2023, a junior technician named Prayas Gaur was working near one of the mill's large paper machines. The machine was known as PM5, and like many industrial paper machines, it relied on powerful rollers, rotating parts, and mechanical couplings that could pull material through with enormous force. In the footage, Prayas can be seen feeding paper into the machine by hand. At first, the task looks routine. He picks up sections of paper and throws them from one area into the other, moving part of the machine, repeating the same motion again and again as the system continues running. But with machines like this, repetition is part of what makes the work so dangerous. Each time he moved more paper toward the rollers, he was working close to a mechanism strong enough to drag material in instantly. And as more paper collected and moved through the machine, it appears to have wrapped or caught around him in some way. Then, in a matter of seconds, the machine pulled him in. Workers nearby rushed to help, and someone eventually managed to stop the machine, but by then, the danger had already unfolded too quickly. Prayas became trapped in the coupling area of the PM5 paper machine, suffering severe injuries to his hand and abdomen. Efforts were made to save him, but his injuries were too serious. Prayas later died from what happened. What makes this case even more disturbing is what employees said afterward. According to reports, workers at the mill raised serious concerns about safety inside the facility. Some claimed that machinery defects had already been reported, but were not properly fixed, and others said employees were sometimes pressured into doing unsafe tasks, even when the conditions were dangerous. One junior technician also told reporters that the emergency button had been pressed too late to prevent the accident. That detail is important, because in a factory like this, an emergency stop is supposed to be the last line of defense. Machines do not wait for people to understand what is happening. Once clothing, paper, or part of a worker's body is caught by moving equipment, every second matters. And in this case, those seconds were not enough. This was not just a tragic accident involving one worker and one machine. It exposed a deeper fear that many industrial workers understand. When production keeps moving, when defects are ignored, and when safety rules are treated like obstacles, the danger slowly becomes normal. Prayas Gaur went to work that morning as a junior technician inside a paper mill. But after one routine task near the wrong part of the machine, he never came home. And that takes us to the next case that is even more frustrating because it should have been avoided before the job ever started. This first piece of footage shows us a fatal forklift accident in China, and the most disturbing part is how preventable it was. At first, it looked like a normal worksite movement. A forklift operator was trying to move a heavy load, but the machine was already being handled in a dangerous way. The load had been raised too high, which changed the forklift's balance and made it far more likely to tip forward. With a forklift, even a small shift in weight can become dangerous fast, especially when the load is carried above a safe height. As the forklift began to lose balance, the danger became obvious. The front of the machine started tipping downward, and the workers nearby realized something was going wrong. One of them, a woman standing close to the forklift, appeared to step in and try to help bring it back down or stabilize it before it fully tipped. But that instinct to help placed her directly in the danger zone. As the forklift shifted again, the machine came down with enormous weight. She was trapped underneath before she had any real chance to escape. The other workers rushed toward her almost immediately, but by then, the damage had already been done. She suffered fatal, crushing injuries beneath the forklift. What makes this accident so hard to watch is that her reaction was human. She saw the machine tipping, tried to help, and in that split second, moved into the worst possible position. But with heavy machinery, instinct is not enough. Once a forklift starts tipping or dropping, no person on the ground can safely stop it by hand. The deeper issue is that the situation should never have reached that point. Forklift safety rules exist for exactly this reason. Operators are trained to keep loads low, avoid overloading the machine, keep people clear of the operating zone, and never allow anyone near a forklift that is unstable or tipping. When those rules are ignored, the danger does not build slowly. It can become fatal in seconds. This was not a hidden mechanical failure that no one could have seen coming. The warning signs were visible before the accident happened. The load was too high. The machine was unstable. Workers were standing too close. And when the forklift began to tip, the woman tried to help in the only way she could think of. But that decision cost her life. That is what makes the footage so disturbing. It shows how one unsafe lift, one moment of poor control, and one instinctive attempt to help turned an ordinary work task into a fatal accident. But if you thought it couldn't get any worse than this, the next case proves it can. In January 2022, one press of a button inside a bakery in Baku, Azerbaijan, turned a routine cleaning job into a fatal accident. The production area was winding down after a shift, and the machinery needed to be cleaned before work could continue. Around 4 p.m., 51-year-old bakery worker Matanat Hasanova began cleaning the inside of a large industrial dough mixer. To reach the flour and dough left at the bottom, she had to lean over the edge and place her arm inside the mixing drum. At that moment, the machine was stopped, but it had not been properly locked out. That detail matters because in any industrial setting, a stopped machine is not the same thing as a safe machine. If another worker can still turn the power back on, then the danger is still there. As Hasanova was cleaning inside the mixer, another bakery employee approached the control panel and activated the power, apparently unaware that Hasanova was still inside the drum. The mixer blade started instantly. Hasanova was caught before she had any real chance to pull back or call for help. Nearby staff reacted, but the emergency stop came too late. She died at the scene. The investigation focused on the lack of communication and the absence of proper lockout procedures. In workplaces with dangerous machinery, systems are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of mistake. A worker cleaning inside a machine should not have to rely on another employee noticing them before pressing a switch. After the case went through court, the co-worker who turned on the machine was convicted of negligent homicide and sentenced to 2 years of correctional labor. But what makes this case especially disturbing is the question viewers keep asking: how could someone not know she was there? Whether it was negligence, poor training, panic, or something worse, the result was the same. One worker was inside the machine, another worker pressed the button, and a routine cleaning job became impossible to undo. And that takes us to another accident where the worker had no real chance to escape. This accident happened in 2018 during a cleaning job inside a chemical workshop. On the afternoon of May 3rd, a deputy workshop director identified only as Wong arranged work on one of the hydrogenation reactors. The reactor had already been used with ethanol and a chemical catalyst, so even though the machine looked like it was ready to be cleaned, the inside was still dangerous. At around 1:41 p.m., the top opening of the reactor was opened. That was already a moment where safety mattered. Inside a machine like this, air can become dangerous if flammable vapor is still trapped inside. Normally, workers are supposed to fill the reactor with nitrogen first. Nitrogen pushes oxygen out and helps stop the inside from becoming explosive. But that safety step was skipped. Instead, Wong opened the vacuum valve 3 times. This pulled fresh air into the reactor. And as that air mixed with the ethanol vapor still inside, it created an explosive mixture. There was another danger too. Some of the catalyst left inside the reactor was rainy nickel, a material that can ignite when it is exposed to air. So by pulling oxygen into the vessel, the cleaning job had already become extremely unsafe. After that, Wong moved closer to the opening and began rinsing the inside of the reactor, cleaning the paddles and the leftover catalyst from the walls. From the outside, it may have looked like a normal part of the job, but inside the reactor, air, ethanol vapor, and exposed catalyst had already mixed together. Then, during the rinsing process, the reactor suddenly flashed. A blast erupted from the opening and hit Wong at close range. There was no time to react. The explosion threw him back with violent force, and he later died from his injuries. Investigators later found that the accident happened because the proper safety procedure had not been followed. The reactor was opened, but it was not protected with nitrogen. Instead, the vacuum system pulled air into a space that still contained flammable vapor and reactive catalyst. That is what makes this accident so disturbing. It was not one random machine failure. The danger was created step by step. The reactor was opened. Nitrogen protection was skipped. Air was pulled inside. Flammable vapor mixed with oxygen. Then the cleaning started while the inside of the machine was already unstable. A job that should have been controlled had quietly turned into an explosive situation. And by the time anyone realized how dangerous it had become, the reactor had already flashed, costing Wong his life. And that takes us to another workplace accident, where one small mistake resulted in ending someone's life. When a 42-year-old worker arrived for her shift at a wood processing workshop in Bac Ninh, Vietnam, it began like any other morning. Inside the facility, heavy machinery was already running, processing raw timber into industrial wood chips. She was stationed near the front of the production line with another female co-worker, sorting and aligning heavy pieces of lumber so they could move onto the conveyor belt. It was physical, repetitive work, the kind of job where every movement matters at first, but after enough hours, the motions can start to feel automatic. That is where the danger came in. While she was handling a piece of wood near the moving line, part of her clothing caught on the conveyor's high-friction rubber. At first, she did not seem to realize what had happened, but the motors began pulling her toward the intake area before she could free herself. Her co-worker heard the sudden cry and reacted immediately. She dropped what she was holding, grabbed onto the woman, and tried desperately to pull her back from the machine. But the conveyor was too powerful. The motors kept dragging her toward the intake, and the co-worker could not overpower the force. Within seconds, the worker was pulled into the processing line, causing the chipping assembly to jam. Her co-worker ran to the far end of the facility to trigger the manual emergency shutdown, but by the time the machine stopped, it was already too late. Emergency responders arrived, but they could not save her. The death deeply affected the local community. She was reportedly the primary breadwinner for her family, supporting her husband and 3 children. What makes this accident so painful is the helplessness of the footage. Someone saw what was happening. Someone tried to save her. But once the machine had her clothing, human strength was not enough. A normal shift, one caught piece of fabric, and a machine that did not stop in time. That was all it took. But this next clip is disturbing because the worker was doing something that looked completely routine. When a 29-year-old tire technician began inflating a truck tire in Brazil, it did look like a normal repair job. He was working at his family's tire shop on August 26, 2024, reportedly covering the business alone while his father was sick. So when a truck driver arrived for routine maintenance, he got to work quickly, trying to keep the shop running and the customer moving. But truck tires can be far more dangerous than they appear. When they are under pressure, the amount of stored energy inside them is enormous. If the tire wall fails, that pressure does not release gently. It explodes outward with enough force to destroy metal, throw objects across a room, and kill anyone standing too close. As the technician inflated the tire, the rubber wall suddenly failed. The compressed air tore through the tire in an instant, creating a violent blast that hit him before he could move away. He had been positioned right beside the tire when it happened, and the force struck him with devastating impact. The explosion launched him several meters across the street, where he struck a concrete lamppost. People nearby heard the blast and rushed over to help, but by the time they reached him, there were no signs of life. First responders arrived soon afterward and confirmed that he had died at the scene. Military police sealed off the road so investigators could examine the tire, the pressure equipment, and the remains of the failed rubber wall. But they found no clear signs of tampering or foul play. That is what makes this accident so frightening. It was not caused by someone deliberately doing something reckless for a thrill. It happened during a normal workday, in a small family business, during a job that tire workers do constantly. One moment, he was inflating a tire. The next, the pressure inside it became more powerful than anything around him could withstand. And from one ordinary shift, we moved to another moment, where the entire situation changed in seconds. 2 workers were sitting beside a construction site, taking what should have been an ordinary break, when the danger was already moving toward them. On November 29, 2025, the men were resting near a road in Chongqing, China, just a few feet away from an active work area. Nearby, a forklift operator was trying to move a stack of large metal storage cages through the site. From a distance, it probably looked routine, the kind of movement that happens constantly around construction zones and industrial yards. But the load was stacked high, unstable, and extremely difficult to control. As the forklift moved forward, the driver began to realize the cages were shifting. The stack tilted sharply to one side, and within seconds, the balance was completely gone. There was no time for the workers sitting nearby to react. The entire metal structure slid off the forks and came crashing down directly onto them. The impact buried both men beneath the wreckage. One of them appeared to try to hold part of the weight back long enough for the other to escape, but the cages were far too heavy. The forklift driver immediately jumped from the cabin, while nearby workers rushed in to pull the frames away as quickly as they could. For a few moments, it looked like the accident had ended in the worst possible way. But then, almost unbelievably, both men were pulled out alive. They stood up shortly after the rescue and were taken for medical checks where doctors confirmed they had no serious lasting injuries. What makes the footage so unsettling is how close it came to being a fatal accident. Nothing dramatic had to happen. No explosion, no collapse of a building, no massive machine failure. It was just one unstable load, one short movement forward, and 2 workers who happened to be sitting in exactly the wrong place. But the next case shows how one button, one movement, or one wrong decision can be enough to end someone's life. An early morning shift at a rubber processing facility in Gia Lai, Vietnam, turned fatal when a worker was pulled into an industrial hopper. The facility specialized in large-scale rubber latex processing, and the day had just begun. Around 6 a.m., a 34-year-old factory worker arrived for his shift in the latex grinding sector. His job involved manually feeding chunks of raw latex into a large industrial machine, where rotating blades broke the material down before it dropped into a cooling pool below. It was the kind of work that becomes dangerous precisely because it becomes familiar. The worker had done the task many times before. He understood the machine, the rhythm of the job, and the tools used to guide the latex into place. But machines like that do not allow room for instinctive mistakes. Once something gets caught in the mechanism, there is almost no time to correct it. That morning, the handheld tool he was using suddenly became wedged near the grinder. Instead of letting go immediately, he tried to pull it free. That single reaction changed everything. The machine's force was far stronger than anything he could fight by hand. Within seconds, the tool was dragged downward, and the worker was pulled with it into the hopper. Nearby, workers cut the power as soon as they realized what was happening, but by then, the machine had already done the damage. Police investigators later arrived to secure the site and assess whether workplace safety procedures had been followed. What makes this accident so disturbing is how human the mistake was. Most people like to imagine they would simply let go, but in the moment, instinct can take over before the brain fully understands the danger. He tried to save a tool from the machine, and in seconds, the machine took him instead. But what happened next is disturbing because the worker never saw the danger coming. The worker was only opening a gate. It was the kind of small task that happens on job sites every day. Stepping away from the main work area for a moment, helping a delivery driver get into the yard, and then returning to whatever had been happening before. But in February 2026, at a residential property in Paraguay, that simple action turned fatal. At around 3 p.m., a delivery vehicle arrived carrying materials for the site. One of the workers paused what he was doing and walked over to open a large wooden gate so the truck could reverse into the property and unload. From the outside, there was no obvious reason to think the gate itself was dangerous, but the structure was already unstable. As he pushed it open, one of the handles caught against a vertical framing post. That small point of friction placed pressure on the upper section of the gate, and suddenly, the support beam above him snapped loose from its mountings. The worker never had a chance to look up. The heavy wooden beam fell directly onto his head, knocking him unconscious and sending him down onto the cobblestone driveway. People nearby rushed toward him, but the severity of the impact was clear almost immediately. One woman moved in to help, only to step back in shock when she realized how serious the situation was. Medical teams and police arrived shortly afterward, but there was nothing they could do. The worker was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators later examined the gate and documented the degraded condition of the wooden structure to determine whether negligence played a role. But no arrests were made. What makes this case so disturbing is how ordinary it was. He was not operating heavy machinery. He was not working at height. He was not handling a dangerous tool. He was simply opening a gate. And because a structure that should have been safe had been allowed to deteriorate, one basic movement became enough to end his life. And that takes us to an accident where the final mistake was not even made by the victim alone. In April 2026, a routine utility repair in Aligarh, India, turned into a frantic rescue after a trench collapsed around a worker. A major infrastructure repair project was underway along Railway Road, where crews were trying to fix an underground leak in a main water pipeline. The job required workers to dig a narrow trench roughly 14 feet deep, then send laborers down into the channel to complete repairs. But as the afternoon went on, the walls of the trench began showing visible cracks. Workers on the ground reportedly warned supervisors that the pit was unsafe. In a trench that deep, even a small collapse can become deadly, because the weight of soil and debris can pin a person down instantly. There is almost no space to move, no easy path out, and no time to escape once the walls begin to fail. Despite the warnings, 32-year-old laborer Mahendra Singh was ordered back into the trench to finish welding before the shift ended. At around 2 p.m., while he was working below ground, the walls gave way. Tons of mud, asphalt, and rubble collapsed into the narrow channel, burying him before he could react. His co-workers rushed in immediately and tried to dig through the shifting debris with their bare hands, but the weight of the collapse was overwhelming. By the time an excavator arrived and cleared enough material to pull him out, it was too late. Mahendra was unconscious and was rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors declared him dead on arrival. He had suffered fatal asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. The incident triggered outrage because it reportedly happened after warnings had already been raised. The junior engineer, accused of ordering him back into the trench, fled the site after the collapse, and family members and co-workers later staged a protest at the hospital, blocking the body from being moved for autopsy until senior officials promised an investigation. What makes this case so disturbing is that the danger was not invisible. The cracks were there. The warnings were there. The people on the ground knew the trench was unsafe, but the worker was sent back in anyway. And that brings us to this final case, which is one that stays with you, because the worker was only days away from leaving this kind of work behind. In 2022, 56-year-old David Lima was working on a road project in Ponta Grossa, Brazil, a job that should have brought him one step closer to retirement. A major infrastructure project was underway in the city's central business district on July 9th. The crew had been brought in by the city to repair old pavement and prepare the road for a new layer of asphalt. David Lima was experienced, respected, and close to the end of his working life. This was supposed to be one of his last jobs. As the machinery moved into position, Lima and several co-workers stepped back and waited near a brick wall while the next phase of the work began. Even the mayor was reportedly standing nearby, overseeing the start of the downtown project. Everything about the scene looked like a normal public works operation. Then, a loud bang tore through the street. Without warning, a high-pressure tire on one of the paving machines exploded. The blast was violent enough to destroy the metal rim and send fragments of rubber and wheel debris flying toward the ground crew. Lima was struck by the debris and collapsed almost immediately. Workers rushed to his side while emergency teams from both the fire department and medical services were called to the scene. But the impact had caused fatal trauma to his neck, and despite the speed of the response, he was pronounced dead before he could be moved into an ambulance. What made the case even harder to process was that the machinery had reportedly passed its required inspections. The failed tire was said to be nearly new, meaning there was no obvious warning sign that anyone on the crew could have seen beforehand. And that is the tragic part. This was not a worker ignoring danger or stepping into a clearly unsafe place. He was standing where workers stand during road projects every day, waiting for the next phase of a job he had done for years. Then, only days before retirement, a machine part that looked perfectly normal failed without warning. That's all for today, folks. If you'd like to see more of this creepy content, click on the video on screen.